and welcome back to Book and Page. We are on to section 3 of Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. So, as always, we'll do a brief summary of what happened in this section, especially since I'm breaking up these scenes on my own. And then we'll talk a bit about what actually happened and things. So, this is a longer section, and quite a bit of knowledge comes to light in it, which makes it a very interesting subject to talk about. So, Creon enters the scene. First time we've seen him, but he's been mentioned repeatedly. He is, in fact, Oedipus's brother-in-law, brother to Oedipus's wife, who we're also going to meet in this scene. So, Creon enters proclaiming that he's innocent, because in the last scene, Oedipus says that Creon's trying to take his throne. No, so Creon comes in, says he's innocent, and then Oedipus comes in, and they fight a bit over who served the city well, who wants to take over, and whether or not Oedipus has the right to kill and or banish Creon. So, the chorus tries to mediate, and then realizing they're struggling, actually calls upon Jocasta, that's Oedipus's wife and Creon's sister, and says, please just intervene here, please help. So, Creon is in fact spared from death thanks to both Jocasta and the chorus, and he leaves, still announcing he's innocent. So Creon's here, Creon's gone. Jocasta, however, stays, and she begs to understand what Oedipus and Creon were actually arguing about. So Oedipus does go ahead and explain his belief that Creon, had betrayed him, and convinced Tiresias to claim that Oedipus was in fact the murderer. As you do. And then we start getting into the world of weird. This, for some reason, reminds Jocasta that, prophets don't really know things, because it turns out her and Laius had a son together, and then a prophet showed up, told him that he was going to be killed by his own son, but Lysias, he got over it. He pierced that kid's ankles, had him thrown out into a field to die. And hey, look! Prophecy didn't come true. Gets weirder from here. Prophecy didn't come true because Laius was killed on a crossroad somewhere way over there. The kid dead. Prophecies don't mean anything. And for some reason, this story suddenly makes Oedipus like, you mentioned a crossroad. Fuck. Yes. So, turns out Oedipus suddenly has this sinking suspicion he might have in fact murdered this man. So he himself tells a story about another prophecy that he had in this other kingdom, that he would in fact murder his father and lay with his mother. If you're wondering what the Oedipus complex is from Freud, it is wanting to lay with your mother thing. So, because Oedipus didn't want to do that, Freud, he actually left that kingdom, to avoid murdering his father and sleeping with his mother, and met a man on a crossroads whose retina was mean to him, and the man was mean to him, so he killed the man and the retina. Ha! Suddenly I think I might have killed your king. Yay. So, having come to this realization that they might have foiled some prophecies, but he might actually be causing the plague, it's decided between Jocasta and Oedipus that they will in fact call upon the one man who survived this attack to come and tell his story. Because, as the chorus has told us, the man seemed to imply that it was a bandit attack and there was a group of people. So, you can't mistake one person for a group of people, so let's call the guy in. If he says it was a group of people, Oedipus is innocent, he killed a different man, it's fine. But if it's one person, well, if it's one person, Oedipus is in trouble. It's a good plan. It's a good plan. Chorus ends the section with a prayer to the gods to, you know, tell the truth. Or maybe the people just aren't going to believe in the gods anymore. Maybe not the best way to end off this section. I'd again like to draw your attention to the Bacchae, which is everybody suffering because they didn't believe in a god. So, okay, yeah. So, has Oedipus, in fact, killed the king? Most people watching this, even if you don't know the story in advance, you can probably figure out at this point in time where this is all going. But we will get the full reveal in the next sections. But, I mean, already you're just like, well, okay. So again, I would like to go back to that Oedipus complex comment, just again to say that literally everybody in this situation is attempting to avoid the outcome of Oedipus sleeping with his mother. Like, he actively left the kingdom that he was raised in with his parents to avoid killing his father and sleeping with his mother. So, I mean, he's like actively trying to not have this happen. So, does Oedipus secretly want to sleep with his mother? The answer, no. Anything he's done at this point in time, he's unaware of. And that, in fact, becomes the issue, right? Is how unaware are these people about doing these things, and thus, how, in fact, guilty are they for being unaware while doing these things? Again, the fact that we got a plague going on right now, gods don't care. Gods do not care. You did these things, and you're gonna have to acknowledge them. You're gonna have to pay for them. But did Oedipus want to sleep with his mother? No. No, he did not. So, with that comment aside, I apologize in advance for... with that comment aside, with this section, there's an interesting sort of discussion going on about men in families together. Between, you know, Laius and his son, and Creon and Oedipus and his supposed father. Again, let's operate with the understanding that we know what is going on here. Because you can dig a lot deeper when you are aware that, you know, Oedipus is in fact the son of the king, right? These prophecies haven't been circumvented. They are in fact true. Which means that he is in fact sleeping with his mother. He has in fact had children with her. Creon is both his brother-in-law and, in fact, his uncle. Laius, the man he killed, is his father, but there was also a concern about him murdering his adopted father over there. So, a lot of male family relationships here And none of them are positive. What's up with that? And the issue is, if you watch like a lot of media or read a lot of literature, this father-son relationship, not often super positive. Unless like the son is a really little boy who wants to grow up to be his father. Like once the sons get to an old point, it's not good. And what we're actually seeing here is an issue between rulers and heirs. Because you're more likely to have a positive relationship between a father and a son if those people don't rule a kingdom. Like farmers. Have as many sons as you want. More help in the fields. It becomes real problematic the moment you're in fact a king, because your son is your heir. And then you start getting suspicious. Because your son in fact will inherit the kingdom when you pass away. So the suspicion comes in then of what happens if my son decides he wants to start ruling now. What if he just decided to kill me and take over the kingdom now? And then that becomes just a cycle of suspicion and possible violence then, because once the father starts thinking that and treating his son as if he's a danger, well then the son starts thinking, what happens if my dad tries to kill me so that I won't inherit the throne? And it becomes a question of like, who kills who first to prevent this from happening. Now this is not exactly what we're seeing here in Oedipus, but it's a symptom of it. Because Laius has been directly told this is something akin to what will actually happen, right? Eventually his son will get uppity, want to rule the throne, and will kill his father to get him out of the way. Or at least that's how Laius is seeing it, right? He's not seeing this as some sort of accident that's probably going to occur. Like, he is relatively sure that this son is actively going to murder him. So, Laius does what fathers sometimes do, which is, well, if my son's gonna kill me, I should kill my son first. And it is a question just then of how actively he's gonna participate in this murder of his son. And a lot of times in Greek philosophy, Greek literature, it's never going to be direct. It's never going to be, I'm just going to stab this kid. Because one, that's infanticide. And it's not a good thing, right? It's frowned upon. God say no to the infanticide. So usually what it results in, of course, is the method that Laius takes, which is abandoning the child to the elements. Problem solved. And I haven't actively murdered this kid. I've just passively murdered the kid. And again, this goes throughout literature. It is not purely Greek literature you're going to see this in. There's a point in Arthurian literature where in an attempt to kill one kid, Arthur literally kills like every other kid except the one he was aiming for. Same is true with biblical stories. My cat's in my purse, which was what that noise was. Now, biblical stories, deaths of firstborns, killing everybody to try and kill Moses, or killing everybody to try and kill Jesus. Usually it doesn't work. Usually the kid gets away. And what's really interesting with the Greek account of stories like this is you were actually then perceiving a reflection of what has occurred with the gods. Because Zeus himself had a story like this. So Zeus's father is Kronos. And Kronos killed his own father to take control of the Titans. And then, when his wife started having kids, he was like, nope, I killed my own father. This is not happening. So he starts swallowing his kids whole. He's actively eating his children to prevent them from them usurping him as he usurped his own father. Now, of course, his wife doesn't like this, so she smuggles her youngest child out while pregnant, and she bears Zeus and then gives Kronos a rock to swallow, so he thinks he's eaten this last kid. Eventually, Zeus becomes big man. He comes back, frees his brothers and sisters from Kronos' stomach. They're all full grown. They've survived. I mean, yay for that one. And he does, in fact, kill Kronos and usurp his position now as the head of the Olympians, the head god Zeus. So, what we're actually seeing here within Greek stories is human nature actually reflecting events the gods themselves have gone through. It is not purely this human fear of being usurped. It is in fact a godly fear that occurs as well. So how do you deal with that, right? How do you actively deal with the fact that gods and men act the same way when it comes to fathers and sons? And oftentimes they're at war with each other. Well, again, there's the option of trying to kill the kid. And that doesn't usually work. What's really interesting here, between this godly story and the story of Laius and Oedipus, is this idea of fate, right? The prophecy has shown up that Laius will be killed by his son. So in an attempt to prevent that fate from happening, Laius actually attempts to kill his son. And Jocasta actually says that this attempt was successful, that Apollo prevented this fate from occurring. But, again, what you have to keep in mind is this reflection we're seeing of this god story of Zeus and Kronos. Because, again, fate says that the son will kill the father and usurp him. And even Kronos cannot prevent this fate from occurring. So when Jocasta says that Apollo prevented this fate, she is actually falling into a big mistake. And we, as people studying Greek theater and Greek tragedy and Greek literature, should be aware of not falling into this mistake as well, which is that fate is not controlled by the gods. Fate is in fact a thing that is independent of the gods, and the gods themselves are subject to it. So while they may attempt, just like humans will, to subvert things that are fated to happen, that subversion doesn't work. And in fact, Homer mentions this in his Iliad. There are several points where gods are tempted to try and save their demigod children. And other gods actually have to stop them and remind them, if that person is fated to die in this circumstance, then they must die. You cannot interfere. There are certainly other times that they do interfere, but in moments like that, it is because that person is not fated to die then. The gods are fated to interfere and save that person because that's their fate. And that's sort of heartbreaking across the board, because fate becomes this powerful thing that even the gods can't control. And it's a mistake to think that the gods can intervene to change your fate. Which is really hard then, because, well, what's the position the gods are in? That's sort of what the chorus mentions at the end. Is, well, if you're doing this to us, what good are you then? If you're not going to prevent this from happening. But it is a question of whether they can prevent it from happening, and how so. Because maybe you make a prayer to the gods, and, well, a positive outcome is what's fated to happen. Well, then the godly intervention assists you in achieving this positive fate. And would you have achieved it if you hadn't prayed to the gods? Because that's the thing. How much then of this is actually free will? How much can we blame Oedipus for his killing of Laius, who's actually his father, if it was fated to happen, and he did it unawares? He did not know the man he killed on the road was actually his real father. Can he be blamed for it? He couldn't do anything other than eventually kill his father because that was what was fated to happen. Can we blame him for it? And can we blame Laius for attempting to abandon this child? Because if you can blame one and not the other, that doesn't really work. If Laius is trying to survive, and in fact, if abandoning the child was what was fated to happen so that Oedipus could eventually kill his father, who is at fault here? If fate can't be usurped, even by the gods. And what does that say then about this family relationship? If there's always going to be a suspicion, because a son is always fated to take over for his father. Usually, though, it's because the father has died naturally or for another reason, and the son inherits after him. But what happens if this fate is sped up? What happens when you try and subvert this fate? It's not a good relationship, and it's frightening to actually see it echoed between the Greek humans and the Greek gods. Because the gods are supposed to be above all of this, but they're precisely not. They are precisely just as guilty as the humans for this failure of men within families having positive relationships and having these usurping relationships that they're chasing after. But what's, in fact, even more interesting then is the dual nature of a different male relationship within this family that we see again in Oedipus, which would be the relationship between Oedipus and Creon, which we know is actually an uncle-nephew relationship. And the reason why this one is actually really interesting, and I call dual-natured, is because there are points where it certainly looks like that father-son relationship, where there is this hostility and concern that one will try and usurp the other. But it's usually actually in reverse. If a nephew is ruling, there is a concern that the older uncle will attempt to usurp the throne. And we see this in places like Richard III, right? Prince of Persia. And here in Sophocles, right? There is a concern that the uncle, because he was the brother to the previous king, feels he may be entitled to the throne over the nephew. Especially, again, if the kids are younger, but the violent relationship doubles up then when the nephews are in fact older, and there is some concern about mutual violence in an attempt to ensure that the other person isn't violent first. And this seems to be the suspicion that Oedipus actually has. He is so concerned at this point, because someone has murdered the previous king, that his own concern is any male within this household who is old enough that he needs to be concerned about. And right now that's Creon. But that nephew-uncle relationship is dual-natured because if the uncle is in fact the ruling point. As you go through literature, you'll start noticing that the uncle-nephew relationship, when the uncle is the ruler, is in fact a very positive one. It's a very strong relationship, male relationship within the family, because the uncle can guarantee that his nephews are from his bloodline, because he knows that they're his sister's children. She bears them, they're his bloodline. You never have that secure knowledge with your wife, because she bears them, but there is always, and in literature this is true, there is always a suspicion that that woman has slept around. Maybe it's with the gods, maybe it's with another person. A lot of times it might not even be willingly. But there is always a suspicion that taints the father-son relationship, that the sons may not in fact be the bloodline of the father. Your nephews, however, you will never have that concern about, because you know your sister bore them. So you can actually have a very strong relationship, bloodline-wise, with your nephews, trusting that they will in fact be better to inherit than your sons. Does this complicate family relationships between men even worse? Yes, because if brothers were violent enough with each other about who was inheriting, once you throw some cousins in there, and does this then make some concern about another relationship we're seeing in here, which is the incestuous relationship of ensuring that we keep bloodlines? Yes. In this case, it's certainly not anything that Oedipus was intentionally aiming for, but does that mean it's forgivable? Again, with the fact that the gods have interfered and sent this plague down to stop it, it's not forgivable. But you also have to remember, historically, we have had families who have actively married into the family in an attempt to keep this bloodline. Really what I want to say is family relationships are really wrought with issues, especially male relationships. Father-son relationships in a lot of literature is not positive, because there is always this understanding that the father will grow old and die and the son will take over. And there's always the suspicion that somebody is either going to try and prevent that, or try and hurry it along. So from there, just families become so complicated, especially when fate becomes involved. And even the gods cannot prevent fate. Does anyone in this section, or this play, even deserve what's been happening to them? Again, that's the question. We are supposed to feel sad because we don't think they deserve it. But the gods are saying that even unknowing choices have consequences. So I'm going to end with this statement, which is try and get along with your family members, but not so much that you end up sleeping with any of them. I'm going to keep reading, and I hope you do too. See you next time.